Hi, I'm Jennifer Potter, Executive Director of Be Well Texas. Too many people are struggling alone these days, and alcohol and drug deaths are increasing. We started Be Well Texas to offer high-quality, science-based addiction treatment and recovery services anywhere, even at home. We provide compassionate, caring support virtually or in person. In many cases, there is no cost for treatment if you don't have insurance. Really. Welcome to Be Well Texas. We're glad you're here.
Hello and welcome into the Republic of Football podcast. I am your host, Carter Yates. Joining me is Dave Campbell's college football senior writer, Mike Craven, and that magazine tour, baby, just keeps chugga going along. Where are you at right now?
I'm at home. I went to A&M yesterday, which is only about an hour and 40 minutes from me. So back at home on Tuesday, then it's Texas State Wednesday, UTSA Thursday, Houston Friday, Rice Saturday. So we'll do the south and eastern part of the trip after doing DFW and Lubbock last week.
Well, we're going to talk about some of those magazine tours right now. We're in the middle of the off season, but middle of our busy season at Dave Campbell's, working on that magazine, and Craven is a traveling man all around. Let's talk about which school you want to talk first, Craven. We got TCU, Texas Tech, and SMU on the docket today. Dealer's choice.
Let's go SMU. Let's go with the ACC team that made the college football playoff last year.
So what was your biggest question entering into the magazine stop? You said ACC Championship contender last year, college football playoff. Did you have big questions about this team?
Yeah, they're mostly on the defensive side of the ball, especially in the box. They lost a lot from their defensive line: Elijah Roberts, Jared Harrison Hunt, Anthony Booker, and then at linebacker. I mean, we've talked about what they've lost, at the second level with Ahmad Walker and Kobe Wilson. And so they've recruited well. They've done more high school recruiting over the last cycle or two. And so there's some young guys like an Alexander Kilgore waiting in the wings at linebacker, Cam Robertson. But they also hit the portal. So just who was standing out at defensive line, what was going on at linebacker, just kind of what Scott Simons' thoughts on were the front six, front seven of that defense. Because I think the secondary is going to be pretty good and experienced.
Okay, so the defense was awesome last year. Scott Simons, I think, one of our favorite coordinators in Texas. You kind of answered my question because I was going to ask which position could they be screwed on and which are they going to be okay on, because they lose a lot of big contributors from each three levels of the defense, right? The defensive line, it's Elijah Roberts, Jared Harrison Hunt, both starting linebackers in Ahmad Walker and Kobe Wilson. Defensive backs, Jonathan McGill, Cale Sanders, and Brandon Crossley. So they're going to be fine in the secondary, you think. What position are you still most concerned about?
Probably defensive tackle, and that's just because of the newness of a lot of those guys. Like Terry Webb, the Texas State transfer, sounds like he's had the best spring so far, that he's pretty far along, and he was an all-state guy for us last year. I think Terry Webb's a really good football player. That was an underrated pickup for them at the transfer portal. But they were just really talented and really deep. All their defensive tackles, I think all their defensive linemen really that played a lot of snaps last year were P4 transfers, right? They came from a Miami or a Georgia. And we'll see just kind of if they're able to replace those with like players, especially with what's going on at the linebacker position. So I guess just kind of the kind of core of that defense, right? Defensive tackle, middle linebacker next to Alexander Kilgore. Kind of who are those players going to be? What's the depth going to be? That's probably the biggest concern I would have.
Is that your biggest question exiting the magazine stop? Well, we asked you what your biggest question was entering. Do you have any new questions that popped up maybe for the team?
Offensively, it would probably be at wide receiver. Romello Brinson is coming back from injury, and they're expecting Jordan Hudson to take a step forward and be a number one wide receiver, or at least like a number 1A, 1B type wide receiver with Brinson. But beyond that, it's a lot of new faces and young guys. A Jalen Cooper, who's a freshman, was talked about a decent amount. Dalen Singleton is a player that they really like. And so, they lost Ashton Cozart. They lost Roderick Daniels and Jake Bailey and Keyshawn Smith and Muji. Like, they just lost a lot at that position. RJ Maryland coming back is basically like getting a wide receiver back. I mean, they see him as much as a wide receiver as they do a tight end. But just who's going to be the targets for SMU, for Kevin Jennings? That's been a really strong position for them in the last 4 or 5 years. They're counting on some guys emerging that maybe haven't reached their ceiling yet. And it's just a matter of if they do.
I saw in your insider notes up on TexasFootball.com, guys, go check out SMU insider notes. Let me give a little nugget from that. They said RJ Maryland's the fastest pass catcher we have. This is a tight end wide receiver hybrid coming off a torn ACL. Did that give you pause? Because I read that and I thought, I don't know if I like that he's the fastest pass catcher they've got.
Yeah, I don't think that they have like a speed demon on the outside. Maybe one of those true freshmen has that kind of skill sets, but I do think it speaks more to RJ Maryland. I would imagine he's a top 5 fast tight end in the country. And in a lot of ways, he is just a big receiver. I think 15 years ago, he would just be kind of a larger kind of like X receiver or something like that. And they're going to use him out wide a lot. Like I think we're going to see sets where, it's Brinson, Jordan Hudson, RJ Maryland at wide receiver, Matthew Hibner playing tight end. And that's going to be kind of their guys on the field with whatever running back ends up there. So, I think he's going to play a lot at wide receiver. I think they're going to use some 2 tight end sets, or at least that look like 2 tight end sets when they're in the huddle. And they're excited to have RJ Maryland back just for his mismatch creation alongside with a wide receiver core that's looking for some new faces.
So another question I have on that offensive side is the running back room, because I did not realize Jalen Knighton is not there anymore and Kamar Wheaton is not there. What's going on with the running back room right now?
Yeah, I think those were academic casualties. If I read that right, they didn't play last year for injuries, and I think a lot of times that can be hard on players to kind of stay engaged and stuff. And so they're gonna be looking for some new guy. I mean, losing Brashard Smith is probably the biggest loss on the offense, right? Like that's the biggest hole they have to replace. Redshirt freshman Derek McFall was probably the first name on the list. They really like him, think he's going to be special. They kind of compared him to Smith, not as big, but can be a pass catcher out of the backfield, runs bigger than he is. And then also Chris Johnson Jr., who's not related to that Chris Johnson, even though they play running back and are both from Florida.
I wish he was related to that Chris Johnson.
And he plays like he is. He is really, really fast. Like I was out there for practice last Wednesday, and he was explosive. Like he was a very fast, quick, agile athlete. So I think they're also adding, more in the summer, maybe at that position. So, I do think that's a question mark, but I guess I just assume that they're going to figure that out. Like they have the talent on the field. It's just who emerges as kind of the go-to guy, or maybe they do it by committee this year.
Well, it's also because this time last year, Brashard Smith was an unknown. I had no idea he was going to be this good, Do you think, this is very hard to say this early, but do you think they're going to be better or worse on offense next year? Because from my sense of it, Kevin Jennings is a clear-cut starter. The offensive line should be awesome. I'm questioning the wide receivers. And you think the running back is there on the roster. You just don't know who it is yet. Like, is that enough ingredients to get back to ACC Championship contention?
I don't think that they're going to be better. I'd imagine the best that they could do is as good. Unless some of those true freshman wide receivers just turn out to be, the next Rashee Rice or something, and they just explode onto the scene. Maybe that changes the equation. I do think Kevin Jennings growing and having a full offseason as the starter and having suffered some adversity against Clemson and then Penn State, like maybe we're poised to see a better Kevin Jennings. And with RJ Maryland back, maybe the passing game is as good, if not better. I can't imagine the run game is as explosive. Like Brashard Smith was legit one of the best running backs in the country. maybe top 2 or 3 running back in the ACC. Like, he was a real weapon, an unsung hero for them. And I just don't know if one of those guys steps up. But to your point, we didn't know Brashard Smith was going to be such a vital point of that offense either. And so it's still mid-April, and there's a lot to be figured out from a lot of these teams, but I don't know if they have the explosive weapons that they did last year on the offensive side to be better, unless Kevin Jennings is just so much better that it makes up for that.
I feel like that's kind of a trend with SMU. They're obviously a much better program than they were 2 or 3 years ago, but I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong here, I feel like they used to have more explosive athletes at wide receiver in Rashee Rice. And yes, you could say they never had a tight end like RJ Maryland, but we don't know if those guys are on the roster right now at the wide receiver spot specifically.
Yeah, they have 2 guys that they feel have that upside. And I think those true freshmen we talked about are going to change that. I'm just not sure if they'll change it in 2025. But if Jordan Hudson hits his ceiling, he's an NFL caliber player. I mean, they really like Romello Brinson. He was a Miami guy, obviously really talented. If you get recruited by Miami, they just haven't developed into those kind of stars. And they've kind of gone by committee at the wide receiver position. I think compared to last year's SMU team, this is how I would say it. I think the top 10 players of last year's SMU team are better than the top 10 players on average of this year's SMU team. I do think the depth in number 40 through number 70 is getting better and better each year SMU recruits. It's just a matter if some of those guys can pop into this year. And, maybe we're looking back in 6 months and talking about a Derek McFall in the same way we talk about a Brashard Smith. We're like, holy crap, Jordan Hudson's really turned the corner. Now that he's the guy, he's going to be a second or third round draft pick. Like there could be some dudes that make all of this stuff go away. Just on paper right now, I think those are valid questions for SMU at the top of the roster.
I think both you and I are in agreement that we're selling a bit of stock in SMU for this next season, but not for the Rhett Lashley tenure. Like, he's definitely, with the college football playoff, he's got this thing going in the right direction. He's the right coach, but they might take a bit of a step back this year. As most programs would do. From our conversation just now, I'm thinking that might be the case, because if the offense is just as good ceiling wise, like their ceiling is to be just as good as they were last year, the defense was kind of the strength of that team. And I think the defense is losing too many guys to be the same.
Yeah, I agree with that. And not only, I think the defense is probably the unit that's going to have the biggest question marks around it and may regress the most just because of what they're replacing up front. But I also would say that last year's team versus this year's schedule could have easily been 8-4 and not made the college football playoff, which would still be a great entry into the Power Four. But they're at Clemson, they're versus Miami, they're at TCU. Like this road, Baylor is good and coming on to the hilltop, and that'll be a game. So, they could be as good as last year, if not even better than last year, if you talk to the coaches, but still end up with a worse record and look like they took a step back. And, that's just the variables of college football and who you play and when you play them.
Mm-hmm. Any closing thoughts on SMU? Any questions I didn't ask her? I think that's pretty comprehensive preview. Any other fun nuggets though?
No, that's about it right then. I did talk to Coach Lashley about like the future of the general manager position, and he shot down the idea of one day the general manager will be above the head coach in the power structure, the way Andrew Luck is. Like pretty quickly and universally shot that down. And I think that was echoed by most of the coaches I talked to.
Andrew Luck is interesting because I think he's one of the few general managers that is of that stature, a former NFL player. His dad, Oliver Luck, is a commissioner in leagues like that. I don't know what he's doing now, but like he comes from that kind of businessy background. Yeah. I feel like college football, you're going to be hard pressed to find alums of that stature who would take over as general manager and then therefore be above the head coach.
And from the coaches I've talked to, and I'm going to write a story about this and discuss it more, but they feel like he's mistitled, right? Like general manager is a misnomer. Like he is the athletic director for football. Like Stanford is one of those unique schools with 40 plus sports who cares about swimming and diving and all the things that go around football as much as football. And so they're one of those places that would have an AD for all the other sports and basically an AD for football. And Andrew Luck is basically the AD of football and not doing what they would consider to be the general manager's job, which typically is a recruiter scouter type guy or a NIL budget type guy more so than overseer of the football program, like it sounds like Andrew Luck is.
But that title encompasses so many different things at different colleges.
Yeah.
You just said it's either an NIL guy or a main recruiter guy, and you don't really know which one it is because they're all just called general manager.
Yeah, each school I've gone to, and that's kind of part of the story, is each school I've gone to, their general manager has a slightly different role. Their personnel department has a slightly different role. Their structure behind the scenes in the front office is slightly different. So there's not a universal way to do this. Now, maybe in 5 or 10 years, one gets proven correctly and everything kind of floats that direction. But as of right now, each head coach kind of has their own idea, and it typically is probably what they want to do the least, right? Like, or what they consider to be like the most important part of the infrastructure. So probably a telling part of kind of what they value in that position is what they ask that position to do.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to SMU's Iron Skillet rival, soon to be maybe not rival, played on the field anymore. TCU Horned Frogs. Craven, my question to you, do they have a run game this year? Is it all fixed?
I don't know if it's all fixed, but they do feel like it's going to be better. And some of that is offensive line. Like Colton Deary's lost some weight and is going to play center, and they feel like that's going to open up the run game a little bit more, kind of give them more of a push in the middle of the offensive line. They described him as like a dude's dude, just kind of like a grown man, like a tough guy. I think that's gonna help because they want more physicality up front. They need more physicality in the run game. They like their guards, Cade Bennett and Carson Bruno. Bruno's out in the spring, which should be back for the fall. Carson Bennett missed, I think, most of last year, if not all of last year. So I think they're going to be tougher up front. They like Ryan Hughes at left tackle. So I think the offensive line is fixed. It's just who's going to be the running back. And I don't think it's going to be just one guy emerging as like a 1,200-yard back. I don't think they have a Kendre Miller. But they like Kavoyan Barnes. They thought he looked better in practice than he did in workouts. Jeremy Payne's still there, Nate Palmer, Trent Battle. So they have some dudes. I think they're counting on the offensive line improvement becoming an improvement in the run game.
We have said that there's probably 3 Texas teams that have a shot at the Big 12. It's Texas Tech, TCU, Baylor. I love asking these hot take questions so early in the season, but like, do you think going out of the magazine visit, you could still see TCU as a Big 12 title contender?
If they hit their ceiling, yes, because I mean, Josh Hoover is really good. The Big 12 is so volatile. Like, Arizona State won it last year and they were picked last in the conference. And so, yes, TCU, I think, can win it. Their road is tough though. I think their schedule is harder than Baylor's. It's absolutely harder than Texas Tech's. The Arizona State, Kansas State, I believe, are road games, if I have that correct. They have Iowa State and BYU. Obviously, Baylor is always going to play against TCU. So easier to see 5 or 6 losses on that schedule than maybe the 2 others. And I think in the Big 12, where everything is so even, the luck of the draw on the schedule thing can be a main determining factor. The problem is some of those teams I just mentioned may not be any good by the time we get to the season. Some of the teams that look like easy wins or layups are going to be the tough ones. That's just what the Big 12 is. But I like TCU's continuity. Like, we're going to talk about Texas Tech in a second. And I think there's like a real conversation of both these guys are going into year 4, Joey McGuire and Sonny Dykes. Is it alarming if you have to take that many transfer portal guys? And is it a sign? Is it a sign of a healthy program that you don't? And then for TCU, they only took 8. And I only think maybe 3, maybe 4 are going to start. The other 3 or 4 are going to be depth guys. We'll see if that's like something that foreshadows success. And I think TCU is betting on continuity. Year 4 of the head coach, year 3 of the offensive coordinator, year 2 of the defensive coordinator, 18 of your projected 22 starters being organic guys that have at least been there for a year. 2 of the transfers that are going to start are wide receivers, which is probably the easiest position to work guys into. So I think that's the biggest thing for TCU is like their continuity, and they're betting on their recruiting and their development. We'll see if that aligns with the big run into the Big 12.
Not to make this the Texas Tech preview yet, but I said last year when they're portaling an entire offensive line in year 3, I was like, it's not a great sign. Now, they've got a lot of hype because transfer portal's awesome for hype, and they're able to kind of put that money on the table this year. And they're investing in this program and they're all in. But yeah, I mean, I guess the questions you could have is like, if TCU could do that, would they be doing that too?
That's a great question, right? Like if you could add, 4 or 5 players that are at the top of the transfer portal, I'm sure most schools probably would. But I don't think TCU lacks money. I think TCU just sees a market deficiency in high school recruiting and development. And if everybody's racing to the transfer portal, well, let's go get some high school kids that we probably wouldn't have gotten previously. Let's pay them some money in NIL on retention, and let's develop them behind the scenes and then just unleash them in a couple of years. Now, some of these offensive linemen that are coming back were originally transfers. I think one of the things TCU's tried to do in the transfer portal is get young guys to where they don't have to just do 1-year rental type stuff. Like, let's get a dude who's a freshman or a sophomore that we can have for a few years. But I think that's one of the, a lot of this is frustrating. I don't think any of us like the transfer portal and the way that it is, and NIL the way that it is. But what is fun about it in my eye is you get to kind of see the different ways to go about this, like the different strategies to building roster and retaining a roster and kind of attacking the modern era. And even within the state, you see so many different kinds of ways to do it. It'll be fun to see which ones kind of hit and which ones don't.
What is Sonny Dykes' temperament like this offseason? I feel like he's had so many whiplashes because that first year they go to the national championship, they were just like they're behind the 8 ball that entire offseason. And you could almost see that mini collapse coming because they took a month off after the national championship because it was such an exhausting season. They were just behind the 8 ball the entire time. He seemed like he was very content and very confident entering last year, and they finished well, but it got kind of dicey there in the middle of the season, especially when, the iron skillet went how it went. What's he feeling like this year about this team?
I think he really likes his team. I mean, he told me, because I guess this podcast comes out on Wednesday. We're recording on a Tuesday. So the TCU piece will be out by the time this is everywhere. He told me this is the best roster he's ever had. And I think that's the advantage of the transfer portal is the bottom half of your roster should be better than it has been previously because you can kind of get rid of dead weight and reinforce that with players that you really like. And so it doesn't surprise me. He really likes the depth of this team. And again, like the last point, I think the continuity is a big part. He knows his coaching staff. He knows these football players. He watched them win 6 of their last 7 and really dominate the bowl game. In a game against Louisiana at the New Mexico Bowl that a team like TCU would have been given a pass for kind of sleepwalking through, they dominated that football game. And I think he, whether this is true or not, whether this ends up, forecasting or not, I think he sees that as a team that's motivated, that can really like go on a run this year. And they feel a little disrespected. I think their win total is 6.5 right now. Like their projected win total.
I'd hammer that over.
And they really think that they're a good football team, that they have the pieces to make a real run. They're going to get the Bill Belichick right off the bat. And that's going to be a different thing. They got the Deion Sanders thing right off the bat. That didn't go well for them. So I think they're a motivated football team that likes the roster. And it's just a matter of seeing how they match up with the schedule that I think is pretty tough.
Did y'all talk about the Bill Belichick first game at all?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. I think it's going to be weird because you just can't. And I think having the Deion experience probably helps with this. You just don't know the roster. You don't know how the coaching staff is going to attack. I mean, you're just kind of walking into the game blind. And this one's on the road. I think it's on a Monday night. It's not like a Saturday game. It's kind of a standalone game. And so I do think that they're going to feel some pressure to not have egg on their face again. And they know everybody's going to be watching. And, Belichick obviously has his reputation. So I think that probably helps though, right? Like it's probably better than having Rhode Island or something. Like there's a real kind of carrot or a real stick you can give that football team of like, hey, 2 years ago, we became kind of a laughing stock, or maybe that's a strong word, but kind of like a punchline a little bit from being the team that lost to Deion Sanders and getting that run going. I think they want to avoid that this time around for sure.
It's going to be that Monday night Labor Day standalone game. I love that time slot. That's beautiful. But it's true. Like the last few times TCU's been on national TV, it was that national championship, which was horrendous. And then it was the Colorado game, which also did not go well.
Right.
I can't remember like a standing alone national TV game they had last year. Maybe it was the Texas Tech game. That was that Thursday night game.
Yeah, no, I think that was tucked into a Saturday, I think. I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, and that Georgia and Colorado game were like back to back. Those were like the two times, and it just really crushed their momentum that they had built with that national championship season. Then they go 5-7, and then they start 3-3 last year. And I think most people turn the page. I mean, we covered this and talk about it daily. And so we're aware of the run that they made towards the end of the year. But I think a lot of people still see it as kind of a disappointing year, losing to Houston at home, the UCF loss. So I think there's a lot of question marks nationally about TCU, but I do think in the building, they think 8 or 9 wins would be a disappointment. Like they really do feel like they're an underrated football team that's going to be one of the best teams in this conference.
What's that defense looking like? Second year under Andy Avalos. Is it looking good? Looking iffy? What do you think about it?
I think the defense is going to be pretty solid. Definitely improved. A lot deeper. They get a couple of defensive ends and a couple of cornerbacks back that were supposed to be starters last year that just never played. Paul Oyewale, guys like that. What's his name?
Michael Ibukun Ekeyode. I totally messed that one up.
I'm glad you tried it. And not me.
I saw you wavering on that. I knew you weren't going to try to say that one. I was I'll go for it. You already did the first one. That was hard.
But like also at cornerback, like Vernon Glover and Avery Helm, missed most, if not all of last season. And those could have been the starting 2 cornerbacks in theory. So, they went from a couple of positions of importance, because think about the NFL draft. Like, what are the 2 biggest positions that are drafted? It's edge and cornerback. They lost maybe 4 of their 4 starters, projected starters from the summer, to injury early on in the year. Now, all of a sudden, they've manufactured depth behind them, and those guys are back. I think he feels really, really good. The linebacker spots are both obviously, plus marks with Nnamdi being back and Elam's Orr. So Bud Clark's back in the secondary because of the JUCO rule. Andy Avalos, the first time I sat down with him, definitely a little grumpy, maybe, or like a little bit more. I think he was just worried. Everything was so new and he didn't know the roster. I got the impression that like he's really excited about this defense and what it could be. And he had 4 or 5 names at almost every single position. So I think the TCU defense is going to take a big step forward.
It feels like their linebacker crew is one of the stronger ones in the Big 12. Do you think like Elam's Orr is pretty solid? Nnamdi Obiazor is probably the most underrated linebacker in the state, I would almost say.
Yeah, and they really like Max Carroll, who can back up both of those guys, so they feel good. About 3 of their linebackers, and like Caleb Cortez is a new guy, Hudson Hooper, a younger player. Maybe those dudes develop a little bit, but yeah, I mean, linebackers been a strength for that football team, like Johnny Hodges and players like that over the years. So I think they're going to be good again. And you got to remember with Nnamdi, he was late to the linebacker position. He was a safety for most of his career until he got to TCU. So he's still improving. He's not like a 6th, 7th year guy who's hit a ceiling a couple of years ago and you know what you're going to get. Like they talk about him as if he's even better this offseason than he was last offseason. So if they could stop the run, and they really like the Washington State transfer at defensive line. And so if he can be really good next to Marcus Steele, all of a sudden they can stop the run. And that's, I think they're going to be fine in the secondary. So I think they could be a plus defense in the league.
That's all I got on TCU. Any closing thoughts? Any interesting nugs from Fort Worth?
No, they're working on their facilities as well. Texas Tech got huge publicity, obviously, for their facilities upgrades that were unveiled this offseason. TCU should be done. Not the end of this offseason, some of it the end of this offseason, but like into next offseason, it's going to be really nice too. And what's interesting is like, I don't think it's a coincidence that all these facility upgrades are getting hit under the rev share wire, because there's just not going to be money for that kind of stuff moving forward. It's going to, mostly filter towards the players, and these capital gains projects were done in an expedient way, I believe, for a reason.
Was there any talk about Mike Buddy, the new AD, at all?
Yeah, I sat down with him. Had like a 30-minute chat with him, baseball guy. So that was a fun conversation. I think he gets it, with the rev share and everything that's moving forward. Seemed like a quick deal. I'm going to publish here, in the next couple of weeks when I have a little bit of a breath. I'm probably going to publish that conversation just as a Q&A. So here's a nugget. I don't think that there's a lot of appetite for the TCU SMU. iron skillet on the TCU side. He said he's talked to people on both sides where he's talked to some TCU folks that do want it, talked to some TCU folks that don't. But I think he addressed the elephant in the room in that, the head coach has a pretty big say in who gets scheduled and who doesn't at most schools. And for obvious reasons, Sonny at TCU isn't jumping up for joy to put, SMU on the schedule, just with his past at that school and, what he feels like, I think, is a bigger deal to lose it than to win it. And that's because TCU has been, a bigger football school for the last 30 or 40 years, and especially the last 15, 20 as they've been into the Big 12. And that, if you beat SMU at TCU, your fan base isn't all that excited. If SMU beats you, your fan base is wondering who the hell the next head coach is going to be. I mean, that's how Sonny got the job, right? Is like beating TCU. And so I just don't know if in the short term we're going to see the iron skillet back over the next 4, 5, 6 years. I don't think.
I understand that sentiment. I think it kind of sucks personally, just as a college football fan. You wrote that column last year about it. I'll fully agree with that. College football losing its receipts and its rivalries, and that stinks for the fans. I agree. It's yeah, man. I don't know. I also look at the TCU SMU rivalry going away, and who did TCU schedule, like Nicholls State or something, and SMU
Missouri
scheduled
State.
Notre Dame, Missouri State, and SMU scheduled Notre Dame.
Right.
That just shows me that SMU's going for it, and it comes off that TCU's playing scared a little bit.
Yeah, SMU's got another kind of blockbuster non-conference home and home on the periphery. I mean, it's not quite signed, so it's not reportable, but I think it's pretty close, and it's going to be a fun one for the fans as well. And then, honestly, in the previous way college football was, especially with SMU being a G5 program, I totally get it, right? Like, there's only 4 spots. The Big 12 is always going to be hard pressed to get one of those 4 spots. You're going to have one of those 12-0 type seasons TCU had in 22. Why schedule the G5 team up the road? That's not going to give you any points with the voters, and it's only going to hinder you if you lose with recruiting and in the DFW area. Let's just distance ourselves from that and move on. Then the playoff got expanded to 12, and SMU joined the ACC, and now they can count as your P4 game because the Big 12 has to schedule at least one P4 game. They can count as your P4 game. They can be a resume booster. And if you lose that game, it's really no sweat off your back. You just got to go win the Big 12 and you're in the playoff. I mean, it's going to get to 14 or 16 like this year or next year, whatever. It's only growing. And so you don't get knocked as much for losing those games, and they can count as your P4 game. The logic of it used to make sense to me, and it doesn't anymore outside of the, obvious politics of college football.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I guess the only argument would be in the Big 12, there's zero margin for error, basically. So that could hurt them, and that's probably what they're thinking. But at the same time, I understand, I guess, that, and look, I'm not as well-versed in the rivalry to probably even say this, but like, I just feel like TCU would care about beating SMU, and that could make, hey, we went 8-4, but we beat SMU. Like, it's not a successful season, but that was a cool thing to win SMU. I guess they just think it doesn't move the needle at all. Like, rivalry game does not matter.
And that's not the fault to TCU, by the way. That's SMU's fault. Like, between the death penalty and like 7 years ago, SMU didn't care about football. Not enough to move the needle. I mean, there was times where TCU played at SMU and there was more TCU fans than SMU fans, right? So like, I get why 30 years of TCU fans have grown apathetic towards the rivalry because it didn't matter that much on the other side of the Metroplex, whereas TCU was building a new stadium and investing into their program and moving into the Big 12 and playing in the Rose Bowl. SMU had June Jones, right? Like it wasn't the same thing. And TCU, I think rightfully, as a fan base, thought they outgrew SMU. And they did. Like, totally agree. But then now SMU is putting their foot back on the gas pedal. And again, I'm a neutral observer like you. I'm not in that rivalry. I'm not speaking for the fan base. It's just as a neutral observer, a lover of college football, specifically in this state. It's crazy that there's 2 Power 4 programs 35 minutes away from each other that have played for 100 years and aren't going to play anymore. That's just seems the opposite of what made college football awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. But I am thinking about it just too recently because I'm thinking about the new SMU versus what they were for a long time. But totally agree. We could go on for an hour about this. It sucks that the Iron Skillet's going to end. Hopefully it restarts at some point in the future. But until then, you can get some cool Iron Skillet merch and SMU TCU merch at Home Field Apparel using promo code DCTF for 10% off your purchase. I know March Madness is over, guys. Congrats to the Florida Gators. They got some championship merch for the Florida Gators out. You can go get that at Home Field Apparel and start thinking about football season here. Got to re-up that clothing collection for the summer and for the upcoming fall. Head on over to Home Field Apparel. Promo code DCTF for 10% off your purchase. That is homefieldapparel.com. Promo code DCTF for 10% off your purchase. Craven, if Sonny Dykes was super excited for this year at TCU, I can only imagine how excited Joey McGuire is for this year at Texas Tech. What are the vibes like in Lubbock?
Hi. And the day I was there was coaching clinic night on a Friday night, right? Like I was there Friday during the day and they were having their big coaching clinic and everything on Friday night. So it was a happy time in Lubbock. Everybody was in a good mood, obviously. I think in the transfer portal, you feel like you know what you're getting and what you're investing into, but like when you can see it on the field and you're like, oh, okay, we feel like we're getting what we paid for and what we invested in. I think that's a big boost as well. And so far, so good, especially on the offensive line and the defensive line. They feel like they've really, really improved in the trenches. They always thought they had a solid, unit around the offensive line. And now, they feel like, they also have the offensive line. Defensively, they like their portal transfers in the secondary. They added like 4 or 5 guys back there. So yeah, I think they like the scheme shifts, especially on defense. I think they like the personnel. They like their schedule a lot. Obviously.
Yeah, no kidding. The schedule is.
They like the facility. Obviously the facilities, are still kind of a cool thing to walk into every day. They haven't lost their shine. So Texas Tech's not all in. Now, conversely, there's a lot of pressure. You keep your GM, you got 2 new coordinators, you splash in the portal in a way that only LSU probably has done. It's year 4. You got the schedule's right there in front of you, like we just talked about. Like it is a win 10 games, go to the Big 12 championship, or some eyebrows are going to be raised about what this program is.
Seems like Joey knows that, though. I feel like he's
100%.
relishing in that pressure.
Yeah, I mean, he's been in this seat before. Like it's not the same, but like it's not like Cedar Hill's a high school program that doesn't have a ton of pressure. And so, I think he gets it. He's not shying away from it, but it's still true. I mean, you got to go win. Texas Tech doesn't have a history of winning, and it's always hard being the guy that like raises the ceiling, obviously, and sometimes those expectations can be unfair. But also, nobody's ever had this kind of backing at Texas Tech. They've never been positioned to make this kind of leap into the premier of college football. And then also, this is a bigger conversation, but conference realignment's not done. We're 4 or 5 years away when the SEC and Big Ten contracts run up, and when Florida State, Miami, Clemson can kind of get to 2030, 2031 and really afford that buyout. This is trending more and more towards kind of a super conference or a super league or whatever we want to call it. And it's going to be the Big Ten members, it's going to be the SEC members, and then it's probably going to be 20 to 30 other schools kind of thrown in there. And Texas Tech wants to show that they're one of those schools. And you do that by investing, which they've done that. And you do it by winning. And that's kind of the next thing for Texas Tech. Like over the next 4 or 5 years, if they can go win some real games and go play in some games with some stakes, all of a sudden they're very appealing on the market if this thing kind of blows up in 5 years.
Good news is if Joey McGuire's ever stressed out, about the season, he can go in those 0 gravity massage chairs they got in that new facility. I mean, how sweet is that facility looking?
It's pretty nice. It is really nice. Just so many things in there that like are beyond my brain's comprehension. And my grandfather, Charlie Craven, was the rehab specialist at Texas forever. Like that's what he did. Was ice buckets and taping of ankles, and just I think if he walked into that facility, it would like blow his mind. So just state of the art stuff. Their players lounge is 2 stories. There's like an upper and a lower players lounge. There's a barber shop in there. Weight room is huge. You can walk from the weight room straight into the indoor and all that kind of stuff. Like, they got their $52 million worth. That's for sure.
I saw they also had some podcast studios in there, so we might be hurting once those guys hop on the pods. Please, guys, stick to football. We can't play football, please.
Right. Take it off from us.
So what do you think about the schematic shifts on the defensive side? You mentioned Shieldwood coming in for Tim DeRuyter. The defense was awful last year. What are they doing schematically different?
Yeah, I think the best way to describe Shieldwood's defense, especially up front, is like it's a 3-man front, but with 4-man personnel. Like that outside linebacker rusher it is basically a defensive end. Like the Romello Height is going to be out, like he's going to be an outside linebacker technically, but like he's playing defensive end most of the time. I think it's kind of a bend but don't break defense. They try not to let a lot of explosive plays. They try to get guys behind the sticks, and then they can go attack on 3rd down. But Houston was just really fundamentally solid. They try to make you go 12, 13, 14 plays, and they're betting on college football offenses, even the good ones, not being able to do that consistently. Like they're going to make mistakes. They're going to have penalties. They're going to have turnovers. They're going to have loss of yardage, and that's when you can really start to attack. So I think if you combined a more modern, friendly defensive scheme with better personnel, which I think undoubtedly he's got better personnel than Tim DeRuyter had to work with, this defense should be able to take a pretty good step forward in year 1.
Yeah. Is that secondary just all portal guys? Or are there any returners who are going to come back and start, do you think?
I mean, I think like, Mo Horn at corner is a player that's got a chance to start. Chapman Lewis and AJ McCarty probably have a chance. Brendan Jordan is a player that they like as well. I think Bryce Pollock, obviously, at corner is a transfer that's going to start. Cole Wisniewski, also a transfer who missed last year, but was a really productive player the year before that at the FCS level. Like he's going to start. But I think some of the returners have a chance to start outside of those guys.
Mm-hmm. Offense, same thing. New coordinator, Mac Leftwich. Is that offense looking any different schematically, or is him and Zach Kitley kind of similar offensive guys?
I think they're similar. Quietly, Texas State led the state in rushing last year. Like they're going to run the ball. Where Kitley sometimes had to be convinced to run the football, and that became a personnel thing. Like Taj Brooks was just undeniably their best part of their offense, so they became a run football team. I think Kitley would admit he would rather throw the ball 40 times. I think Leftwich likes to be more balanced, would prefer to run the ball and be explosive in the run game as well. They're going to be more vertical. I think they're going to take more shots down the field and try to be explosive. But at the end of the day, there is an offensive blueprint to what works and what people like in West Texas at Lubbock, right? Like at Texas Tech, you're not going to veer too far from the air raid tree. And I think Leftwich was a good hire because there's a lot of familiarity. He's changed some names of some of the plays that he calls to more like verbiage of what it was in the old school kind of Mike Leach offense, to just kind of to give a nod to some of that stuff. Like, and so I think he'll fit in well, and it'll be an offense that the Texas Tech faithful doesn't need a translator for. Like they're not going to run the eye.
So who are they going vertical with?
Well, I think their 2 big targets are like the ones we all know, Caleb Douglas and Coy Aiken, aren't really practicing right now in the spring. Aiken's coming back from, just kind of the wear and tear of the season. And then Douglas, they just kind of shut down. I think they've seen what they need from him. They're expecting him to be one of the best wide receivers in the country. Like he was electric early on. Beyond them, I think there's some new names. I mean, Reggie Virgil, a transfer, is a name to watch there. Tyson Turner, Kelby Valson. And then the elephant in the room is what happens with Micah Hudson. And, I think we'll have more clarity on that when the transfer portal opens up April 16th, and just kind of what he's thinking there. But I think they like their wide receiver room. Just the 2 guys they expect to be the stars are not practicing right now.
Yeah. The Michael Hudson deciding what he's going to do in football will be nice, but I'm going to miss the message boards for sure of the sleuthing that is going on. Micah Hudson, we've seen it Freebirds and somewhere, Who's going to be the running back? I know they got Quentin Joyner from USC. Cam Dickey showed a lot last year. Are they trying to find a guy who's Taj Brooks, like he's going to be a bell cow, or are they going to go more committee on this thing?
I think they're going to go committee on this thing, and it's 3 sophomores, and they have some different skill sets, but they really like them. I mean, you mentioned Joyner and Dickey. They also really like Jacoby Williams. And so they feel really good about those 3 guys, what they can do. You know, the player who is probably best at pass pro is probably going to be the one that gets the most snaps, just because they are going to throw the ball around the yard with Baron Morton being back, and you're going to have to help protect that quarterback and be a receiver out of the backfield. We saw what Ishmati did at Texas State, kind of being a dual threat running back with his ability to be a pass catcher out of the backfield. So I think the guy who can show the most versatile skill set will get the most snaps. But I don't think we look up and see a 1,400-yard rusher like Taj Brooks. It's going to be 3 500-yard rushers, and they each have 15 catches or something.
I selfishly wish Ishmati went to Texas Tech instead of going out of state to Arizona. I mean, it was right there. It was right there.
I'm surprised that TCU didn't knock on that door if Texas Tech felt good at that position. You know, it may be one of those things where, you know, Tech was invested heavily in the offensive line, defensive line, felt pretty good at running back, where after Quentin Joyner, you know, they just stood pat and spent their money elsewhere. Because that's the new reality of college football, right? Like, they all have salary cap, and they've all allocated funds towards each position, just like the NFL has. Like, we're going to spend X amount of money at this spot, X amount of money at this spot. I think Tech felt good enough at the running back position to spend that money maybe elsewhere in the portal.
Are there any big questions you have about the Red Raiders coming out of that magazine stop?
I mean, until you see that defense get better, you know, because I think the offense is going to be fine. As long as Baron Morton's shoulder is okay, and it seems like he's going to start throwing again May 16th is what he told me. And so I think he's going to be fine. He sounds like he feels better this time now than he did this time last year. But defense feels like a spot that, like, continuity helps. And not only are you breaking in a new scheme, you're breaking in 5 to 7 new starters through the transfer portal that just arrived there. So, you know, they really like Lee Hunter and Skylar Gill-Howard. You know, we talked about the secondary dudes and Romello Height. You know, Anthony Holmes is a player that joined Shieldwood from Houston. So I guess my question mark is just, you know, will all those transfers on defense hit, and will that scheme hit the ground running? The good news for Tech is they have a month into the season before they're probably going to get tested, and they'll be able to figure some of that out.
Also, my one counter to that would be, like, could it get worse, especially in the back end of the secondary? It was the worst in the nation last year.
Yeah, it can't get worse probably, but, like, it's the explosive plays that kill you in modern college football. Like, you have to stop giving up the 30, 40, 50-yard plays and just make them matriculate down the field. And I think what was happening last year, and some of it was personnel, not all of it was DeRuyter in the scheme. I think DeRuyter's a solid defensive coach. They weren't good in situations. They gave up a lot of third downs. They gave up a lot of big plays, and that erases any efficiency you have defensively.
Any other nuggets from Lubbock? Was the snow there while you were there, or did that come after?
That came after. I left around 4 p.m. on Friday, and then that kind of happened late into the night, early into Saturday, and then they practiced it Saturday. So I'm glad I got out of there. I would have minded, you know, a little bit of snow before what's going to be a pretty brutal summer, I'd imagine. But just to get home and to get out of there before I got stuck any further, it was nice to beat it. By the time I got home to Austin, it was like 74 degrees. So, you know, Texas is a big state.
I was in Georgetown this weekend for the Two Step In concert, and Saturday was like 35 degrees and kind of drizzly, windy. And, you know, I'm just thinking, like, it will be 90 next weekend. I saw your tweet about Lubbock. It was like, it'll be 90 next week. That's what I was thinking as I'm sitting out there. It's like, it never is like this, except for this one time I'm sitting outside right now for a concert.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, you know, if you don't like Texas weather, just wait till tomorrow type of deal. Yeah. But it's going to be, you know, in a month, 2 months, even a couple of weeks, we're going to be wishing for a little bit of a cold front to go in. So I try to remind myself of that. My issue was I left town on Monday, and you know, you look at the weather, but it's, you know, it's so far away for Friday in Lubbock that, like, it didn't give me a good idea of how cold it was going to be. So I just brought a pullover all of a sudden I get out of the car in Lubbock and the high is 49 degrees and it's windy, because it's West Texas. So like it feels like it's 39. I was like, man, I'm going to have to borrow a jacket from Texas Tech. So luckily with those nice facilities, I was indoor most of the time, but it was an amateur move. I put that on Twitter as well. Like I did not pack. I forgot that even in April, you need to pack for 4 seasons when you go to Lubbock. And that was just on me. I've been there a dozen times and I just, rookie move. I'm a tired dad. I'm a tired new dad.
New dad.
I made a dumb mistake, man.
Don't be too hard on yourself.
It's something, dude. It's something.
Any other notes on this Texas Tech football team? Big 12 champs or bust, baby.
I mean, I do think that.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that's the expectations, right or wrong. I think that they're in the mix. Like, who are the top 5 or 6 Big 12 teams?
Arizona State, Texas Tech,
Kansas State,
maybe Baylor.
I think BYU should be in that conversation, and probably Iowa State. I think those are the 6 teams that on paper have the best shot to go win. And I'd imagine of those 6 teams, Texas Tech has the biggest payroll, has the biggest budget. And so, money talks. And if you're going to sign all these players and hype up the team, like you got to go win. I think they're poised to go do that. And their schedule sets up to do that, but they haven't won all those games yet. And we'll see how they do on the road and early on the season, just some of those bugaboos, but everything on paper is lined up for Tech to have, one of their best seasons ever, maybe.
Well, that's going to do it for the Republic of Football this week. Craven's Magazine Tour keeps chugging along. I will be at UTEP this week to figure out what's going on in El Paso, and then Sam Houston next week. We'll have insider notes all this week coming out on TexasFootball.com, so keep it locked on there. For senior writer Mike Craven, I am host Carter Yates. Thank you for listening, and podcast over.